Rebecca Yarrow said at the end of her Onyx Storm book tour that we've only seen 10% of what Violet is capable of using her second signet. Obviously, spoilers ahead. If you haven't finished the book yet and don't want to know what that signet is, come back later, because the rest of us are about to get into it. So after reading Onyx Storm the first time, I felt like I didn't have a great grasp on what her new signet was, much less why, quote, the Irids told Andarna that she gave Violet something more dangerous than lightning, or what the 90% of it that we have yet to see is going to empower her to do. So I did a deep dive, trying to figure out as much as I could, and there's a lot. I'm going to start with what we know for sure, move into some more things that there's evidence for, even if it can't be confirmed just yet, and then based on what I'm guessing is foreshadowing, end with some speculation on where the signet might end up by the end game of the series. So here's what we know for sure. She's a dream walker. Throughout most of Iron Flame, she has that recurring nightmare about being on a field with a Venom sage who lifts her up off the ground with his power and tries to get her to turn Venom. In chapter 50 of Onyx Storm, Violet has another one of these, but for the first time she notices that her hand has a rebellion relic and doesn't really look like her own. She, quote, fights through the weight of the nightmare and wrenches her hand from the ground before she can give in to the urge to channel from the source. She forces herself to wake up and then wakes Xaden from his own nightmare, and when they start discussing them, she learns that the nightmares she's been having since Resin are actually Xaden's nightmares, and she's been dream walking into them. She protests, saying there's no such thing, and Xaden counters, there is such a thing. Xaden's voice drops. It's absolutely more dangerous than lightning. It's a form of intrinsic. He ends on a whisper. Violet continues arguing until Andarna seems to confirm it, but even then Violet is still confused, saying it doesn't make sense because signets are based on what they need most, and there's no part of me who wants or needs to know what anyone else is dreaming. The trembling stops as it clicks and I understand. Except when I did, I was cut off from her while she slept all those months. So ostensibly, she was desperate for any kind of connection to her bonded dragon since she was cut off while Andarna was sleeping, and Violet needed the ability to walk into her dreams. We have no indication that actually occurred, though, learning that Xaden's signet, which is also a form of intrinsic, doesn't work on dragons. So Vi's would presumably be the same, and she unconsciously developed the ability on Xaden instead, which was probably made easier by the connection their minds already share, which might explain why she shared his nightmares even when they were hundreds of miles apart. But why is this ability supposedly so dangerous? I guess I just read through this quickly and didn't appreciate the gravity of it the first time, but it's spelled out very clearly right in this same scene. Xaden says, I can only read someone when they're awake, and am limited by their ability to shield. No one can shield while they're sleeping. You could potentially walk straight into Milgren's own dream, and he couldn't stop you. Probably wouldn't even know. Until you consider using it on someone like Melgren, it might seem like the signet would be harmless, as Andarna calls it, and passive, even a gift, in a peaceful culture like the Irids. But if she did use it on Melgren, if he was dreaming about the outcome of a battle he foresaw, it would effectively give her his same ability to foresee the outcome of battles. So, since it seems likely that they'll inevitably end up at odds again, yeah, I can now understand why, as Xaden says, they'll kill you if they find out. It won't matter that you're the best weapon they have against the Venom, against me. They'll snap your neck and call it self-defense. And that's just observing other people's dreams. But we also learn from Xaden, I think you meddle because I wanted to channel in that field and found myself raising my hand instead. If she can also inhabit the dreamer's consciousness and meddle with their decisions and actions, that could potentially be wildly powerful too. We don't know that changing their decisions in a dream would necessarily translate to it happening in real life, but just the ability to make them consider other paths and perhaps use the concept of inception to plant ideas into their mind, hey, you could make a whole Christopher Nolan movie out of that. All of that seems pretty clear cut to me at least, so let's move on to what else she'll be able to do with this signet and start out with things there's solid evidence for. In chapter 56, she's again in that same nightmare of Xaden's, except this time she consciously realizes it. The realization does something that feels like a snap across the back of my skull. Suddenly, I'm no longer a part of him as he takes off running ahead of me, dressed for battle. Xaden! I shout before he makes it half a dozen steps. He stops, then slowly turns to face me in the grass-covered field. His eyes widen when he spots me, then narrow as he glances left, then right. You shouldn't be here. So besides just observing or affecting their actions in a dream, she can obviously become separate from the dreamer and interact with them too. But there's more that we can glean from the scene as well, and this first one is pretty fun. Right after that, Vi tells Zayden, "This isn't real." I take his ice-cold hand in mine, then startle. I can feel that. If she, and presumably the Dreamer too, can feel each other, and if Zayden, who took off for who knows where at the end of Onyx Storm and will presumably be MIA for a lot of the fourth book, but Rebecca Yarros still needs to give the fandom their romance, I think dream-walking spicy scenes might be the perfect solution. Anyway, transitioning from dessert back to the main course. The sage shows up and Vi is desperate to wake up, but that only ever happens once the sage strikes, his sword coming down on me. Pain. I need pain. I reach for my thigh, but only find a smooth layer of leather. A few lines later, this is a dream, I remind myself, and if it were mine, I'd be armed. I slide my arm down my hip and find the hilt of a dagger. Before I can second guess my plan, I wrench it free. The sage's eyes widen on the polished wooden handle, but I'm already swinging it toward my arm. The blade sinks into my skin. I jolt upright in bed, gasping for breath. That really seems to me like there was no dagger before. She thinks to herself that she ought to be armed, and then suddenly the dagger appears there at her hip. So not only can she meddle with the decisions/actions of the dreamer, it seems like she can alter the reality of the dream itself. This has huge potential. She might even be able to control everything about the dream, where the dreamer is and what's occurring in the dream. But is there really any evidence for this beyond just making a dagger appear? I think there is. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Rebecca Yarros talked a bit about Vi's second signet at the end of her Onyx Storm book tour, and she also told us there's one person in their world that could train her signet. So, the obvious question to ask at this point is who? There is another Dreamwalker in this world, and it seems unlikely to me that it would be someone we haven't already met or at least heard of, considering that we're 3/5 of the way through the series. We know most of the main riders' signets, and as for the relatively few that we don't, like General Atos for example, we have no hints that it might be them. Perhaps it's a marked one second signet, like maybe Bodhi's or Sloane's if they have one, but they wouldn't be experienced enough to train Violet. And again, we've gotten no hints about this. Whenever Rebecca Yarros teases something like this, either in the books themselves or telling us there's one person who could train her during an interview, there's always been enough clues that in hindsight we know it could have been sussed out. So, since there's no evidence for Atos, Bodhi, Sloane, or any other writer I can think of, I highly doubt it's any of them. But remember, nature likes everything in balance. In Onyx Storm, we learned that Venon's sages and mavens have signets too, and certain signets seem to manifest such that there's an equal balance on either side of the war. At first, we're led to believe that Theophany is the lightning-wielding Venon balance against Violet, before we eventually learn that she's actually a storm wielder, and it was Lilith Sorengale who manifested the same signet as the balance against Theophany. We also see Lynx manifest shadow wielding, and after Zayden talks him down, we get this. The squad ushers Lynx down the hall, but I stay behind, shock gluing my feet to the carpet. I don't understand. You're our generation's shadow wielder. Not anymore. Magic knows. Zayden's shoulders dip as he turns slowly to face me, his brows scrunching an apology before he schools his features. He's the balance. This clearly implies it's at least Zayden's belief that magic knows he's turned Venom, and if there's supposed to be balance between the two sides, then the good side needs a new shadow wielder to offset the fact that Zayden turned Venom. I'm relatively certain that the Venom have their own distance wielder too. In chapter 52, this happens. Theophany's gaze rises to the sky behind me, and she backs away, her eyes widening. Leave them and go! She shouts to the approaching Dark Wielders and breaks into a run toward them. Now! All three grasp hands, and the one in the center takes a single step and vanishes, just like Garrick. So, if we can't find any evidence for another rider being the Dreamwalker that could train Violet, and if there's this kind of balance between the good side and the evil Venom side, then is there any evidence to suggest that there's a Venom Dreamwalker? Yes, Irwin. Let's revisit that final example of Vi dreamwalking from Onyx Storm, where she realizes what's happening and becomes separate from Zayden. She asks him, "Why can't you escape this place? What keeps you here?" "I do," the sage answers from behind Zayden. "It's so nice of you to join us, Lightning Wielder." He tilts his head. "Or should I call you Dreamwalker?" If you reread that whole scene with the idea in mind that he's a much more experienced Dreamwalker, it all makes so much sense. I think he even caused the dagger to disappear from her hip in the first place, and had such a shocked expression on his face when she made it reappear because he didn't think she'd have developed the Signet to that extent yet. And if Berwin is a dreamwalker, I think that might be more evidence that it's a wildly powerful Signet. I feel like I can make the argument that Berwin's dreamwalking is what caused Xaden to turn in the first place. My theory is that when Berwin was fighting our crew in Resin at the climax of Fourth Wing, he saw how powerful Xaden was and decided he wanted to recruit him. He did something that allowed him to infect Xaden's dreams, kept dragging him into that nightmare of his own creation and prying in different ways until he discovered that the only thing Xaden cared about enough to turn for was Violet. That way, once they finally met again during the climax of Onyx Storm, Berwin knew exactly how to provoke Xaden into turning. I will remind you, though, that Rebecca Yarros said we've only seen 10% of what Vi is capable of with her dreaming so far, and I feel like developing the abilities I've talked about so far could get us to like 50%, but I also feel like there has to be a decent amount more. So, what else could there be? Well, here I'm going to get rather speculative, but I do feel like it was very interesting, if not too coincidental, that when Vi walked into Marin's dream, she was fumbling around in Marin's wooden chest for the portrait of her family until she finally finds it, and then embers fly, singeing my hand, and the painting slips from my grip, catching fire on its way to the ground. No! I scream as Kat tugs me backward, and as the flame engulfs the portrait, it's no longer a painting. It's them. My parents, my family. They're burning! And immediately after that, they learn that the village Marin's family fled to is being burned down by Venin. Soon we find out that Theophany killed Marin's parents, and though we don't get confirmation that it happened by fire, I think it's reasonable to assume that that's how they died. The wording in that passage just seems too definitive. I'm convinced that if Vi had known what to look for, the dream could have revealed to her the fate of Marin's parents. Now, we don't know whether there could be any element of precognition here. It definitely seems plausible that the dream and the parents' death happened concurrently, but even that would be a wild power. If the dreams could reveal what is happening in other places that our heroes would have no other way of knowing, that could be huge. But again, could it account for 9 times as much as we've already seen? Personally, I don't think so. I'm just going to throw out my wild, stab in the dark best guess as to how we might see the Signet develop in the long run. Extrapolating that last ability out to the furthest extent to account for the missing 90%, as well as make good on the idea of Signets giving the rider what they need most. Here we go. We learn from Leothin, the older dragon from Andarna's den, that the Irids are magic. What if Vi can somehow use Andarna's magic to make it so that the things she alters in people's dreams come true in real life? In other words, what if that portrait of Marin's family getting engulfed in flames during the dream wasn't just showing that her parents had or were about to die by fire, but actually caused that to be the case? If she realizes this and then changes the dream the way we talked about with the dagger, maybe she could eventually alter the dreams to get a different outcome. Continuing to use Marin's dream as an example, could she have caused the picture to disappear right before it fell into the flames and reappear somewhere safe? And could Andarna's magic then cause them to effectively teleport in real life right before they were actually killed? I feel like that would be a satisfactory fulfillment of the idea that so far we've only seen 10% of what she's capable of. She'd be able to walk into the dreams of whoever she needs to, put them in whatever scenario she wants, just like Berwin did to Xaden, potentially affect what decisions they make in that situation, and finally implement any changes she wants, making those things occur in reality. She would effectively be able to use Andarna's magic to manifest almost anything she wants to happen in real life. Now, I'm sure there would have to be some kind of limitations on these powers so that she couldn't just snap her fingers and fix absolutely everything. And I also think there's some big twists in store for us that will prove that Violet doesn't even know yet what all needs fixing. I started to get into that kind of thing in my last video, Onyx Storm's biggest twist, and we all missed it, but I've been working on gathering evidence for another related theory. You may have noticed that I kept qualifying certain things in this video with respect to the good side versus the evil Venin side. That's because I think things are going to turn out to be much less two-dimensional and more complex and nuanced than that. I think this theory could explain what Theophany meant when she said, once in a century or so, we get a chance to skew the scales in our favor, and how Vi and our crew could potentially use that same idea to tip nature's balance in their own favor. Once I make it, that theory video will be linked right here, so make sure to subscribe and click the bell if you want to be notified when it gets posted. And if you're looking for more Empyrean content to hold you over until whenever we get Book 4, I'd recommend checking out this fanfiction I'm writing that retells the events of Fourth Wing from Xaden's point of view. including revelations from the following two books, like Xaden and Garrick's second signets. Thanks for watching.